always want to hit one and just go back and just double check and make sure your mockup isn't just a huge button and you can't see anything else. The number 5 is also a very handy key to know. And the reason, well, we'll go over that a bit later, but I'll just say it will bring you back to center on the screen. So you might be kind of scrolled out here or there. You want to get back because you can't find where your drawings are. Just hit 5 and you'll get zoomed right back there. Plus and minus in Inkscape work a bit differently than other graphic design programs you might be used to. You just hit plus or minus. You don't have to hold down Shift or Control at all. It's just the bare keys, which I like a lot, but that's one little quirk of Inkscape to know. Page up and page down. Within each layer of Inkscape, and I'm not going to go into layers in this presentation, it's not necessary, but just know that there is a concept of layers in Inkscape. The stack is separate from that. So each layer in Inkscape has a stack of different objects. So, for example, if I go back to my little sample mock-up, each one of these, this text, this circle, the circle inside it, this text, these are all objects, and they all have a number that they're assigned in the stack, what order they're in. So when you go and you use page up and page down, they will move them up and down the stack one step. If you use home and end, they're sort of the brute force method. So if I hit home, it jumps to the very top of the stack. Can you guys see down there? Or okay. And if you hit end, it jumps to the very bottom of the stack. So that's handy if, like, say you have a label on a button that's text, and then somehow it gets put under the button so you can't read it anymore. Just hit the button, hit end, and it goes to the very bottom, and then you can find that text. So these are keys that you use a lot when you're just sort of navigating through objects on the canvas.
Now those last four keys, they don't relocate selected objects to a different position in the stack. They just show you the different stack layers.
No, they move them.
Okay.
But they move them within one layer in that stack. They don't move objects between layers. So that's one thing to know.
Does that stack, when you're creating objects, the stack starts at the bottom?
Yeah, exactly. So you always start from bottom. And when you duplicate things, one thing to know is it always puts it the next level on the stack.
Right.
Okay. So now I mentioned that I was going to bring this up again. This is the first thing that I have people do in Inkscape when they first start using it, is just click this lock icon. And I can kind of give you a little reminder of where it is in the interface. It's up here. And it's kind of in an obscure place, like it's far away from the other tools that you're going to use. But what this will do is it will prevent when you're scaling objects on the canvas, this blocks the aspect ratio, so like your text doesn't get squished when you're trying to scale it.
I don't have that icon. Yeah, I don't either. It's open by default. It's in the middle.
It's open by default. It's
open. It's in the
yes,
middle.
you do. It's right there. It's between width and height.
Oh. Okay. It's different. Oh, it's different.
Does it look different on your?
Well, it's an open lock as opposed to.
Oh yeah. Okay.
All right, my mistake.
See, I always have that selected, so when I took the screenshot, it's
Selected.
Sorry about that. But yes, make sure you have that on. There's rare cases where you're going to want to turn it off, so just turn it on and keep it on. I probably should come to the Inkscape developers and have them turn it on by default, but maybe I'll do that after this. Okay. This is another little public service message for beginning Inkscape users. The Control and Shift keys are magic. They do a lot of really handy things. It's kind of hard to discover them. So when you're interacting with Inkscape, just think, if only it did this. Let me try Control. Oh, it does that. I always find that. So, for example, if you're scaling objects on the canvas, normally what you do is you have a square, and then you scale it up, and it'll go from the bottom left corner, and it'll roll like this. But in some cases, especially like when you're designing radio buttons and you want to fill them, you want it to grow from the center. You don't want to have to grow it from there. So hold down Shift when you scale it, and it will grow from the center. That's kind of a cool little trick. It also works like if you're rotating an object. Normally when you rotate an object, it rotates from an axis that's in the center of the object like this. But sometimes you want it to rotate, like revolve around that axis. So then you hold down Shift when you rotate it, and it does that. So it's pretty cool. When you're moving objects, if you just hold down the arrow key to move it, or if you're using the mouse, that's freeform. If you hold down the arrow key, it'll move like this. But if you hold down Shift, it jumps much faster, which is good if you need to move something on the canvas really quickly over here, but you want it at the same kind of level in the file. You don't want to have to drag it out by the mouse and then align it by hand. You just want it perfectly aligned. Then just hold down Shift, and that thing will cruise. And then when you do finer adjustment, let go of Shift and do it that way. So and some other things, undo. So some commands in Inkscape, like Control G groups. If you want to ungroup something, Control Shift G. So Shift does undo. And then stroke versus fill, and I'll go into this in more depth later, but if I select an object and then I select a color, by default, it selects the fill color. But if I hold down Shift and select a color, it selects the stroke color. So these are just, Shift and Control are very cool keys, and depending on what you're doing in Inkscape, they do really helpful things, so just keep that in mind. Okay, and then this is my last public service message, and I kind of mentioned this a little earlier, but if you get lost on your canvas, just hit 5. And I'll show you a little bit later an example of I'll show you a few of the files that I use for my mockups. And just in short, when I create mockups in Inkscape, I have one source file, it's an SVG file, and I might have like 20 different screens in the same file. And I stack them in I'll stack them vertically, or I'll stack them horizontally, or a mix of both. So I'm constantly panning around in the file, and sometimes if my mouse goes a little crazy, or if I just hit the key too many times, I kind of get lost in There Be Dragons land, and I don't know where I am. So if I hit 5, it just zooms me right to the center mockup, so then I kind of am back on track. So 5 is a handy key to know. Okay, so now we're going to go in sort of the meat of, hey, how to actually create mockups. So all these keys and shortcuts are making my brain explode. Just show me some cool stuff. So this mockup, this is a very functional mockup. This gives you an idea of what a website could look like. And you don't need to be an artist to do this. There's no great, Monet painting in this. No, it's just text and rectangles. That is all it is. And this gives you a good enough feel for your website that you would know this design might work, or no, I need to change this. This is something you can print out and show to other people and get feedback on and get great ideas for your application, ideas for new features, ideas for improvements. And this is how, I think that it's better to do mockups like this and show them rather than implement the site and show it to somebody. Because number one, if it's something that's drawn out like this, and it's just squares and it's just text, someone's more apt to give you honest feedback about it than if they realize, oh my god, he spent 20 hours programming this, I better be nice, and they don't really give you an honest answer. And actually, in a lot of design studies, they've shown that doing a sketch in pencil, or doing it so that it's just a wireframe like this, you get finer feedback, because people are actually afraid of hurting your feelings. So wireframes are awesome. Text and rectangles is all you need. So first I'm going to talk about fill and stroke, because these are sort of important when you're working with rectangles a lot. And I kind of went over this a little bit before, but what you do is to fill in an object, you take that selector arrow that was up here, click it, and then you select the color. That's all you need to do. If you want to have, because that palette along the bottom is the primary way you select color, but if you want a bit more control, like if you have a particular hex code in mind, then you can enter it in here. Or if you want to use the HSL or RGB or CMYK to select color, you can do that. But normally you can just use the palette along the bottom, and that's the quickest way to do it. So then if you want to select a color for the outline, then you hold down Shift, click on the color. You can also do it if you have the fill and stroke palette open. You click on stroke paint. It looks very similar to this, and then you just select the color. So there's 2 ways to do it. And if you need a specific hex color, like you said, you can just enter it in there. 2 other things to know is you select blur, and it'll actually give this sort of a blurry kind of whatever feel. Usually when I do mockups, I never use this. And the number 1 reason I don't do that is, well, besides the fact they're just plain wireframes, it makes your file go very slow. Like it takes a lot of CPU power to work with blur, so I usually just turn it off. Opacity sometimes is useful if you want to say, place a little note on top of the mockup and say, hey developer, you should use this code script to make this work or something. You can make it 50% opacity, so then you can see sort of the mockup drawing underneath, but you can still see the note on top. That's the primary reason that I use opacity in mockup design, but beyond that, I don't really use it either. So. Okay, so next, stroke width. And this you can only control through the palette. There's no shortcut key or anything for it that I know of. So you just click on stroke style, and it has, you can just say how many pixels wide you want the stroke to be. You can also round it if you want, and you can see here, it's a little bit rounded on the edges. You can make it dashed. You can add markers to it. When you add markers to it, you can put like an arrow around the path. You don't normally need that stuff in mockups. Sometimes, occasionally, I do a dashed line. Occasionally I'll do rounded, but I always control the width, so the width is really the most interesting thing to know about here. Am I going too fast? Are you guys able to follow? Are you falling asleep? Are we all good?
Good.
Alright, cool.
Just trying to
So,
figure,
what?
how did you get the stroke width on here?
So there's a palette called Fill and Stroke, and I can show you real quick in Inkscape right now. This is Object, Fill and Stroke.
Object.
So it's in the menu up there.
I have a comment.
Sure.
One of the things, I use Inkscape quite a bit. You're gonna really quickly, if you're not familiar with it already, you're gonna get very quickly familiar with a lot of the keystroke commands, because you're gonna want those things to be open and closed really fast. And I never like go to click those links very often anymore. Took me a month or so to get there, but it's pretty useful that way.
Yeah, and once you have them open, they stay open. And you don't have to, like, if you closed Inkscape and then the next day you open it back up, it'll remember that you had it open. So you don't really have to go up and open it a lot. And actually Inkscape, within the past couple of releases, added this new thing where when you open up Fill and Stroke, it has a thing where you can minimize it to the left. So you can just minimize it, get your work done, have the full screen space, and then when you need it, you can call it back again. So that's kind of nice too. So you're probably not going to be navigating up through the menu to find it a lot. You just open it once and you're kind of done. Okay. So one handy thing to know about the rectangles when you're working with them is, and circles have sort of a special control too. They have this little handle here, and when you pull it, it'll actually round the rectangle. When you're working with circles, what it will do, it'll actually make it like a little pie chart when you drag it. So that's kind of an interesting thing too, but I never use that in mockups. But having the rectangle rounded, it's kind of nice if you want to do like rounded tabs